My name is Nsenga. I was born in 1981 in Brooklyn, New York, in Flatbush, which is an area of Brooklyn that is particularly known for immigrants from the Caribbean. So, knowing where I'm from actually gives a lot of insight to how I was raised and who I am. My parents were actually born in the Caribbean, Guyana, and Trinidad. And they immigrated to the United States when they were just teenagers in the late 60s and early 70s. And my father in particular converted to Islam, and he was in his late teens. My parents met each other when they were in high school. And my mother later converted to Islam as well. So this particular sort of mixing of being a Black immigrant, African descended immigrant from the Caribbean, and also a convert I'm a child of converts to Islam, and being raised in a community, a Black Caribbean community, which was so reflective of my culture. It's like if you were born and raised in Flatbush, Brooklyn, it's like you don't miss a beat when it comes to Caribbean culture. Except for you miss the environment of the Caribbean, but it's like the Caribbean, all of the Caribbean right there in America, in New York. The food, the music, the way people talk, the way people behave, the way people dance, everything is right there. And I always thought it was funny. My grandparents would visit me when I was young. They would visit my family, my family's home for about 2 months every single summer. And my grandma, she would bring us treats and bring us all kinds of stuff from the Caribbean that she would make in Trinidad. And it took a while, but once I got older, I was like, this is kind of hilarious, because everything she was bringing from Trinidad, we literally had down the street at the local store, at many local stores, right? Because it was so reflective of what was actually in the Caribbean. And I did get to visit and spend some time in Trinidad when I was 10 years old. And then also, I that was like one of my neighborhoods I grew up in. The other sort of neighborhood that I grew up in was Bed-Stuy. That was kind of like my second neighborhood. Bed-Stuy of the 80s and the 90s. And the mosques that were there was my religious community of vast majority Black Muslims, but also a huge percentage of them, which I only realized later, are all like majority like Caribbean. Caribbean Black folks, especially at the one mosque that I grew up attending, which was Masjid Musi Khalifa. And Masjid Musi Khalifa is a mosque that was established by Malcolm X in the early 60s. I think it was actually 1964 in Brooklyn. And even at the time, he writes about it a bit in his autobiography. Even at that time, it was the Caribbean mosque, like the Black Caribbean mosque, for some reason. So I say all this to say that I grew up in a place that was very affirming to who I am. I did not grow up, even though you might see me and be like, oh, she's a minority, she's a Black girl, she's a Black Muslim girl. I did not grow up like a minority. I did not grow up thinking like I was a minority, like, oh my gosh, what will people, races? No, I mean, yes, it exists, but no. I grew up in a community that looked like me. I went to school with people who looked like me. I went to a mosque with people who looked like me and believed like me. And so that's a lot of my work has to do with community, and it has to do with me being able to go in, because I think perhaps because I didn't have to deal with a fight with people who were outside of me, i.e. racism, i.e. white people, i.e. whatever, then it just wasn't, it just has never been something very interesting to me, right? I always wanted to go in. How do we believe? How do we see ourselves? How did religion sort of shape my family? How did it shape my community? How did Islam and the choice to shift your spiritual beliefs, which is huge and something I think we oftentimes don't talk about enough. How does that shape how you're able to operate in the world, how you then sort of see yourselves, and how does that change your family dynamic? Because when my parents became Muslim, when so many Black people became Muslim, it's not just a personal thing. This changes how you eat. This changes how you pray. This changes how you talk. Okay, because people start to take on Arabic as names. People start to learn Arabic words and greet each other in a different way. Assalamu alaikum. And we insert a lot of Arabic words into our conversations. Oh, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. Oh my gosh. Allahu Akbar. That's, subhanallah. That's amazing. All these things that just inserted into our language, into what becomes like a culture within a culture. Right. And there's so much overlap. There's parts, of even my culture as a Caribbean Black woman that I grew up not participating in. Like I literally lived in the heart of the Caribbean in the United States, where literally the whole neighborhood is preparing for Carnival, starting like the late spring. And throughout the summer, the summertime, the neighborhood is Carnival. The neighborhood, this is the hub of like preparing for Carnival. It's the thing. The steel pan is there. The steel pan is there. The costumes are being made. All of that. And I could not go to that parade. I had to just get a glimpse of people going to the parade because as a Muslim, it was not considered like by my parents okay for us to participate in such vulgarities. I would just put it like that, right? The nudity, the getting on bad, and the gyrating, and all of that. That was not something my parents were about to allow me to do, but it was still part of my culture. But I had to experience it from the standpoint of people preparing, music being played all hours, because people were preparing musically, people coming out of the apartments, wearing the costume. And I might watch it a bit on TV, but that it shifted, the culture of the neighborhood. So there's these things of like belonging that become apparent in my work, and things that are, there's all these sort of like what we call, where things overlap, and then there's things that are particular. I grew up as a Muslim with this very kind of international view, right? We learned Arabic. I'm still learning Arabic, right? And when we would have our bigger celebrations, it was Muslims from all over, all kinds of different looks and feels and languages, brown people, whether they were Arab, whether they were Pakistani, whether they were, even white Muslims, of course we had all of our Caribbean Muslims, our Latino Muslims, all of that, right? African Muslims, which especially later on became a big part of the community. But we became very international. These are our brothers, these are our sisters, and this idea that these are my brothers and these are my sisters, and they're from all over the world. And, and so I really embraced that. Growing up, I was really exposed to that a lot, especially once we sort of, did things that were not just people from the mosque, but like the sort of bigger sense of community. So I was also exposed to a lot of literature that, about that kind of is hyphen Islamic, hyphen Arab, hyphen Persian, culture, history, and so for me, it's like Harriet Tubman was my ancestor. So is, Abu Bakr and Omar, right? So is Sojourner Truth, and so is Denmark Vesey, so is Bilal, and I'm just to say this, that they all struggled in different ways, and they all sort of were my ancestors, and they all sort of created for me a sense of like who I am, and a sense of pride, and a sense of like, people who had strong beliefs, and then my family's from the Caribbean too. So then I also had this kind of odd, which I realized later, somewhat odd kind of history for myself of what Blackness is. Blackness is not just for me. Blackness is this very international thing that at the same time I'll say that, my ancestors, from the civil rights movement and who were enslaved, some of them who were enslaved in the United States, but those aren't technically my ancestors, right? They're my ancestors in a Pan-African sense, right? But literally my family did not like pick cotton, right? They cut sugar cane. And I later learned that they didn't do that for very long either, right? Because in the Caribbean, slavery was different in the Caribbean. We had one generation of slavery in my family, on some sides, in just a few years. So the way how we remember our African ancestors, the way how we know our history and our culture feels very close. And I never understood until recently, why my grandfather was so aware. My grandmother was so aware of like African culture, and why that was so Shango and all of that stuff, and like Yoruba, and knowing where my grandmother, my great grandmother, where she came from, like why they just knew that so easy. That just goes into Caribbean history. So nonetheless, in my work, I pull from these sources that feel very close to me, whether it's Ali Shariati's memoir about Hajj, and he, especially when those things start to come closer, and I was looking at Malcolm X's pilgrimage, and then sort of thinking about and researching the rituals, then I stumbled upon Ali Shariati, who lived at the same time and was activist at the same time, an Iranian activist and religious leader, and who was thinking about decolonization, and who wrote a book about his pilgrimage, his fourth pilgrimage, a memoir to his fourth pilgrimage to Mecca, but starts it off by speaking about this ritual, this Hajj ritual, as being a commemoration and a performance of Hajar, what she did, who was a Black woman. And he speaks very clearly about her as a Black woman who is the mother of the Arabs, right? Who all Arab people are descended from, and who was the one who was exiled to the desert, and who made the sacrifice, and who opened up the Zamzam, and who, from her, the Hajj became a place, that part of Arabia became a place that became habitable because of the water, and who guarded the water, and who from that community sprung up. And her running, I have this word Tawasai, her running between these two mountains in Mecca is the ritual that is now, in her search for water, is a ritual that since for hundreds and hundreds of years has been repeated by Muslims from all over the world, right? She's buried near the Kaaba. And so, there's these rituals that are performed in Islam. They're so tied up with history and tied up with people and our experience with our Creator. So that work, particularly Tawaf Sa'i, uses Ali Shariati's words and this sort of connection to a person, and connection to the form of the ritual, and connection to the cosmos, because the rituals also reflect our place in the world in the universe, as well in the way how we move. Just seeing ourselves as being like, you are small, but you are really great. Like, you are really part of something so much bigger. You're part of history. We're part of history. We're part of God's creation, and we are part of like a huge continuum. And we carry on the rituals and remember them and reflect on them even when we're not there. So my work often serves that purpose, and this particular series serves that purpose, and to really ground us in being, in performance, and to ground us in what is performance for. It's not just for to exhaust ourselves or to just, I don't know, be interesting or to perform. We use this word in so many ways, even in Islamic tradition, as particularly as American Muslims. We say, I'm going to perform the Hajj, I'm going to perform Salat, and it's not just about the movements, not at all. This is about the movements connecting you, and that every single thing has a form. Every spirit, every action, it has a form, and not just any form. It has a proper form. So we need to, so my work, form is super important to me. That the way how things are presented, the math of it all, the lines, the circles, the shapes, all of that is 100% important, because it's important to me in my life. It's important to me, in my prayers. It's important to me, it's important for me to know when the sun comes up and when the sun goes down, and when the sun is halfway, and when the sun is at its zenith, because that rules my life. That those things tell me when I need to pray. Those things tell me, it's important for me to know where East is. It's important for me to know where Mecca is, wherever I am, right? That I need to know where I am in time and where I am in space, right? So that's form. And that's being specific. And that's something that is so important for me in my work. And that carries on throughout. And the idea of repetition as well. You see that many of my abstract works, especially, and the sort of community, as I mentioned before, because community has been so important to me, and sort of me understanding who I am, and who others are to me, in a spatial sense, and in a sort of time and historical sense, right? So I think the works that I present are all part of this sort of great big project for me that I don't think would ever end. I don't see that as a possibility. It's an exploration of like who I am, and all these kinds of influences, and all these ways how particularly Islam and Blackness and all that has brought to my life as an exploration, how that continues to unfold is something that kind of always is expansive, and always allows me to, reach and to connect to people, connect to history, connect to ideas, connect to form, connect to the Creator, Allah.